Welcome back to BNC Prime Live, everyone. As we approach the one-year anniversary of George Floyd's murder, a leading civil rights activist says now is not the time to get complacent. Tamika Mallory helps amplify attention on numerous police violence cases with her organization Until Freedom. She's become a political force after being thrust into the spotlight during the legendary Women's March back in 2017 and is literally changing the face of activism. Tamika Mallory joins us now live from Fort Lauderdale. Welcome back to BNC, Tamika.
Thank you so much for having me back. I'm happy to be here.
We're glad to have you. Well, people, they're so affected by your passionate and strong voice, and you gave an epic speech after the death of George Floyd, but people may not realize that you were actually born into a family dedicated to civil rights. Can you tell us about your childhood and how that led you to where you are today?
During the week, we went to precinct council meetings to learn more about the local police department, to have an influence on what happened in our communities. We went to other community meetings. We were known as the family in the building and in the housing projects that people would come to if there was trouble, and come to for advice on how to deal with issues related to, injustice. And that was my Saturday. And then on Sundays, we went to church. And of course, we went to a church that was very involved in the local community. And so my entire life has really been all about community work. And I come from the type of family that it wasn't a suggestion. You had to be a part of some type of activity to help empower the community, or you would have trouble at home, to say the least.
Well, now you have a new book out called State of Emergency: How We Win in the Country We Built, that gives a plan of action for African Americans. Tell us about this new book.
So immediately following the murder of George Floyd, I was in Minneapolis, and I delivered a speech at a press conference, one that I didn't have a real opportunity to prepare for. But like everyone else that I know, and certainly I'm sure you felt the same, there was a level of rage and anger that I was experiencing, that was coming from a real deep place. And that day, I just decided to tell the truth and to say what was on my mind and heart, unscripted, not politically correct. Something that I probably, if I could go back now, I probably would change some things. But it was honest. It was my truth, and it was clear because people reached out to me from all over the world with one of two responses. Either they were totally in agreement and they understood and felt the same, or thankful for the fact that I was put in a position to speak in that moment and to articulate the pain and rage of so many. Or they, may not understand. Maybe they didn't necessarily agree, but it caused them to stop and listen. It caused them to have a different level of concern. And of course, because of the, fact that we were in the midst of a pandemic, people had been shut down. They were sitting still. They could not ignore what was happening on TV. And to be clear, I didn't just show up in Minneapolis. I drove along with my co-founders at Until Freedom from Louisville, Kentucky, where we were just there visiting for the first time with the family of Breonna Taylor. At that point, Breonna had been deceased she'd been killed, I think in March. So this is now May. So it was about 2.5, almost 3 months later. And people were not saying her name across the nation. And of course, now all over the world, people know who Breonna Taylor is. And we were trying to figure out, what do we do to help this family? We visited another family, Mikhail Rose's mom, in a different city, actually his dad in a different city in Indianapolis. And then we drove into Minneapolis. So this is sort of like a tour, if you will, of families who have lost their loved one. And then we ended up there in Minneapolis. And so the book came from all of that. It came from a place of, pain and truth. And asked me to write down what I said in the speech and to help make it clear and to really sort of expand my thought process and what I think is the prescription for us to work together to make some changes so we don't see Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, and so many others dying at the hands of police and or at the hands of white supremacists in this country.
And the list goes on, but we want to take a quick break. Stay with us, Tamika. We're going to continue this conversation on the other side. We'll be back in just a few moments. Stay with us. You know, in the past, people thought of activists as people like Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr., but Tamika, you really are part of the new generation, and you've gone from being a movement baby to a movement strategist. Tell us about how activism has changed and what it means to you now.
I think it's a passing of the baton, if you will. It has changed in that we have the ability to add our own flavor. I'm sure, we do things differently, as did Dr. King and others who came before him. But it certainly is a continuation. I don't like to see myself as recreating a wheel, but instead finding new ways to bring awareness to our issues and also to attract other people, more people to the cause. And so some of it looks different, of course. I'm obviously a woman, which means very different in that we are used to seeing people with major profiles that are charismatic males, and that is something that has changed. But I think the other thing is I study and respect greatly the model of Ella Baker, who was a woman who believed in decentralized leadership. So instead of it just being one person at the head of my organization until freedom, there's four of us. And there are more people on our leadership team that help to make decisions. And so that is sort of the style that may be a little different from what we've seen in the past.
And Tamika, I do want to talk more about your organization because people have often criticized you or confused you with the organization Black Lives Matter. And you've unfairly taken some beatings, as a matter of fact, because of that confusion. So I'd like you to clarify your organization and how it's different and what you are doing differently and what you are not a part of.
Yeah, so I support 100% the Black Lives Matter organization and the way in which they have been able to activate particularly young people around the world. I worked closely with a number of individuals in the organization, and certainly I support Patrisse Cullors as one of the leaders of the organization. And so that's always good. There is certainly a relationship among many of us who are out here with different organizations, and there should be. However, we are different. Until Freedom is a different organization. As I said, we are more of a decentralized model in terms of the head of the leadership of our org. We share leadership. We share the opportunity to make the decisions and be the face and voice of the work. We're slightly in that way. And also, there have been people who assume that because Black Lives Matter has received a certain level of donations and support over the last year, that it just means that automatically organization, and particularly mine as a very visible person in this movement, has received similar support. And unfortunately, we haven't. That doesn't mean that we don't think that every organization out here should receive support, major support. And in fact, the $90 million that Black Lives Matter received is not enough for the fight that we're up against, because we're fighting individuals who have billions of dollars. We're actually fighting institutions. But nonetheless, my organization, as a very young, new organization, even though I am not a young and new activist or organizer, is not in that position. And so I think people do get confused. They lump us all together, and we are all a part of the Black Lives Matter movement, but our organizations function differently. We have different leadership, and our support is obviously different.
Well, we are out of time, Tamika, but thank you so much for joining us and telling us all about your new book. We wish you much success, and please come back once again on BNC Live.